Good evening. I want to start tonight with a number, because sometimes a number tells a story before anyone does. 78%. That is where prediction markets landed roughly on the likelihood of a United States government shutdown. 78% is not a whisper. It is not a shrug. It is the sound of people collectively leaning forward in their chairs. And what makes that number so striking is not just how high it is, but how quickly it moved. Because this jump did not happen in a vacuum. It did not creep upward over months of budget hearings or quiet procedural fights. It spiked. And it spiked in the immediate aftermath of something else entirely. The killing of a civilian by federal immigration agents in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Now pause there for a moment, because already you can feel the weight of that sentence. A civilian death, federal agents, Minneapolis. There are moments when the floor drops out, one might say. And for many people watching this unfold, that is exactly what it felt like. Prediction markets are not emotional spaces by design. They are meant to be cold, transactional. People put money down on outcomes they believe are likely, not outcomes they wish for. So when those markets swing hard in one direction, it is worth asking why. What information changed? What calculation shifted? In this case, the answer sits squarely in Washington, but it begins far from Capitol Hill. The killing in Minneapolis set off political fallout, not abstract fallout, not rhetorical hand-wringing, concrete consequences. Senate Democrats, responding to that killing, refused to support a funding bill for the Department of Homeland Security. That refusal is not symbolic. It is procedural. It has teeth. Because without Democratic support, that Homeland Security funding bill does not move forward. And without that funding bill, the clock starts ticking louder. The end of the month is not a suggestion. It is a deadline. If no deal is reached before that deadline, the federal government faces a shutdown. That is not speculation. That is the structure of how this works. And so, in the space between Minneapolis and Washington, between a civilian death and a Senate vote, the markets reacted 78%. I mean, you can almost hear it, someone might say. The collective inhale. What makes this moment especially tense is how compressed everything is. There is no long runway here. There is no extended cooling off period. The refusal by Senate Democrats is already in place. The funding bill is already stalled. The deadline is already approaching. And the markets, which exist to quantify risk, have responded accordingly. It is important to be clear about what is driving this. The markets are not reacting to vague political drama. They are reacting to a very specific chain of events. A civilian is killed by federal immigration agents in Minneapolis. That killing produces political fallout. That fallout leads Senate Democrats to withhold support for the Homeland Security funding bill. That withholding increases the likelihood that no deal is reached before the end of the month. That increases the likelihood of a shutdown. Each step follows the next. There is a straight line here, you might hear someone say quietly, and there is. The phrase government shutdown can sometimes feel abstract, especially when it gets used frequently in political coverage. But the mechanisms that lead to it are anything but abstract. They are votes, they are bills, they are deadlines. And in this case, they are tied directly to the actions of federal agents and the death of a civilian. That connection matters, because it explains why this moment feels different from other budget standoffs. This is not just a disagreement over numbers on a spreadsheet. It is a response to a killing. The Senate Democrats' refusal is rooted in that event. And the markets reading that refusal have adjusted their expectations accordingly. Prediction markets do not issue press releases. They do not hold press conferences. They move numbers. And when they move numbers this sharply, it is a signal that participants believe the political impasse is real, unresolved, and close to a breaking point. You might find yourself saying, almost without meaning to, because 78% is uncomfortably high. It suggests that, absent a sudden change, A shutdown is no longer a remote possibility. It is, in the eyes of the market, the most likely outcome. Again, that does not mean it will happen. It means that people who are willing to risk money believe it probably will. That belief is shaped by what has already occurred, not by what might occur. A civilian death in Minnesota, a stalled Homeland Security funding bill, a refusal from Senate Democrats, a deadline at the end of the month. Those are the facts on the table. And tonight, those facts have been distilled into a single number that is reverberating through political and financial circles alike. There's a heaviness to it, someone might say, because there is. This is where we are as we begin tonight, at the intersection of tragedy, politics, and probability, watching a countdown that does not pause for reflection. And in the next part of this story, we need to walk carefully through how that refusal in the Senate functions, why it matters so much, and how it has come to dominate the shutdown conversation so quickly. Because the story does not end with the number, that is only where it starts. So let's slow this down just a little and walk carefully through the part of this that sits squarely in the United States Senate, because this is where the situation tightens. The Homeland Security funding bill is not a peripheral piece of legislation. It is central, it is necessary, and right now it is stuck. The reason it is stuck is not confusion, and it is not a scheduling problem. It is the result of a clear refusal by Senate Democrats to support it. That refusal follows the killing of a civilian by federal immigration agents in Minneapolis. The connection between those two things is direct. One follows the other. When Senate Democrats declined to back the bill, they did so in response to that killing. That is the political reality as it stands. And once that support was withdrawn, the math changed immediately. In the Senate, support is not optional decoration. It determines whether legislation advances or stalls. In this case, the absence of Democratic support has halted progress on the Homeland Security funding bill. Now here is where timing becomes critical. The federal government operates on funding deadlines. Those deadlines are fixed. They do not adjust themselves to political tension or public outrage. The end of the month is the end point here. If funding is not secured by then, operations are affected. That is how a shutdown becomes possible. Not because someone announces it, but because the calendar runs out. This is where it gets tight, someone might say under their breath. What prediction markets are responding to is not just the refusal itself, but the lack of resolution after it. There is no deal in place. There is no agreement reached. And there is no indication within the facts we have that the impasse has been cleared. So the markets adjust. They look at the stalled funding bill, they look at the deadline, they look at the political fallout from the civilian killing, and they assign odds. Those odds surge to roughly 78%. Again, that number is not an opinion. It is not a forecast from a pundit. It is the aggregated judgment of people betting on what they believe will happen. The spike itself tells us something important. It tells us that the refusal by Senate Democrats is being taken seriously as a durable obstacle, not a temporary protest. Because if market participants believed this would resolve quickly, the odds would not sit where they are. They would wobble, they would hedge. Instead, they jumped. There's no cushion left, someone might say quietly. Because in this scenario, there isn't. Every day that passes without a deal compresses the available options. Every hour without movement raises the stakes. And none of that requires dramatic language to be true. It is procedural. It is mechanical. The Homeland Security funding bill is required. Support for it has been withheld. The deadline remains. What makes this particularly stark is how little distance there is between cause and effect. A civilian is killed in Minneapolis. That killing triggers political fallout. That fallout leads to a refusal in the Senate. That refusal elevates the risk of a shutdown. There are no extra steps here, no detours. The Senate Democrats' position has become the fulcrum on which the shutdown risk balances. And this is why the prediction markets reacted so sharply. They are not responding to rhetoric. They are responding to blockage. When a funding bill cannot move forward, the system does not have many alternate routes. It waits, and then it stops. I mean, that's the whole thing, you might hear someone say, because it really is. The focus, then, is not on whether the shutdown is dramatic or chaotic in theory. The focus is on whether the necessary votes appear likely to materialize before time expires. As of now, the facts indicate heightened fears that they will not. That phrase matters. Heightened fears. It does not claim inevitability, it describes risk. And that risk has been quantified by the markets at roughly 78%. This is why coverage of this moment keeps returning to the same elements. The civilian killing, the Senate Democrats' refusal, the Homeland Security funding bill, the end-of-month deadline. Remove any one of those, and the equation changes. But all of them are currently in place, and so the pressure remains. What is striking is how quickly this became the dominant concern. Not gradually, not after weeks of debate, almost immediately. The political fallout from the killing did not stay localized. It moved directly into federal legislative consequences. And once that happened, the shutdown conversation escalated fast. There's no room to look away, someone might say, because everything is connected here. The markets are not waiting for statements or reassurances, they are watching actions. And the most consequential action so far is inaction. The absence of support, the absence of a deal. That absence is loud. As the end of the month approaches, the situation becomes less forgiving. There are fewer opportunities to course correct, fewer procedural maneuvers available, and that is why the shutdown risk is being treated not as hypothetical but as imminent. Again, this does not add anything new. It simply follows what is already known. A civilian was killed by federal immigration agents in Minneapolis. Senate Democrats refused to support the Homeland Security funding bill in response. That refusal has heightened fears of a shutdown if no deal is reached before the end of the month. Prediction markets reflect that fear at roughly 78%. Those are the contours of the moment. And in the final part, we need to sit with what this convergence means as the deadline draws closer, and how this chain of events is now framing the closing days of this funding fight. Because the clock is still running, and nothing yet has stopped it. And so we arrive at the last stretch of this moment, where nothing new has happened, and yet everything feels closer. Because the most important fact right now is not movement, but stillness. The deadline is still the end of the month. The Homeland Security funding bill is still without the support it needs. Senate Democrats are still refusing to back it. And the political fallout from the killing of a civilian by federal immigration agents in Minneapolis has not dissipated. That combination is what defines this moment. There's no pause button here, someone might say. And that is exactly right. The system does not slow down because circumstances are heavy. It does not stop because the stakes feel uncomfortable. It simply continues forward until funding is either secured or it is not. That is why the fears of a shutdown have intensified. Not because of rhetoric, not because of escalating language, because of time. Prediction markets do not react to intention. They react to probability as shaped by facts on the ground. And right now, those facts remain unchanged. The surge to roughly 78% is not an isolated spike frozen in time. It reflects an ongoing assessment that, as things stand, the likelihood of a shutdown outweighs the likelihood of resolution. That assessment exists because no deal has been reached, and the absence of a deal matters more than any single statement. I mean, that's the hinge, someone might say softly, because it is. As long as the Homeland Security funding bill remains unsupported by Senate Democrats, the risk remains elevated. As long as the deadline remains fixed, the window for action continues to narrow. Nothing about that is dramatic. It is procedural. But procedural moments are often the ones that determine outcomes. The civilian killing in Minneapolis is not receding into the background of this conversation. It remains the catalyst. The political fallout from that killing continues to shape legislative behavior, and that behavior in turn continues to shape shutdown expectations. This is not a case of unrelated events colliding by coincidence. It is a chain that has not been broken. One fact leads to another. Each consequence follows logically from the last. A civilian is killed by federal immigration agents. Senate Democrats respond by refusing to support the Homeland Security funding bill. That refusal raises the prospect that funding will lapse. That prospect pushes prediction market odds sharply upward. That is the entire arc. There's a gravity to it, someone might say, because there is, and gravity does not announce itself. It simply pulls. As the end of the month approaches, the space for maneuvering becomes thinner. There are fewer legislative days available, fewer opportunities to reset the conversation. That does not mean nothing can change. It means that change would have to come quickly, and until it does, the fears remain. Those fears are not theoretical. They are being actively priced by people who believe the current impasse is real and unresolved. Again, the number matters not because it is precise, but because it is directional. 78% says that in the eyes of the market, a shutdown is more likely than not. That is a meaningful threshold. It reflects a loss of confidence in last-minute solutions. It reflects an acknowledgement that the refusal in the Senate is not superficial. This is where we sit, someone might say, and that is true. This is a waiting moment. Not a dramatic waiting moment, a quiet one. The kind where the absence of news is itself the news. There has been no announced deal, no confirmed breakthrough, no shift in the stated refusal. And so the structure holds. The deadline continues to approach. The bill remains unsupported. The risk remains elevated. All of this unfolds under the shadow of the original event in Minneapolis, which continues to inform the political response. That connection is what gives this moment its weight. It is not just about funding. It is about accountability, reaction, and consequence. And yet, the mechanics remain the same. The government requires funding. That funding requires legislative agreement. That agreement has not been reached. There's no escaping the math, someone might say quietly, because there isn't. As the days count down, the situation becomes less flexible. Options diminish, the system tightens. And that tightening is exactly what prediction markets are responding to. They are not predicting intent, they are measuring constraint. Right now, the constraints are significant. The refusal by Senate Democrats stands. The Homeland Security funding bill is stalled. The end-of-month deadline looms, and the odds reflect that reality. This is where the process rests as of now, not resolved, not concluded, but clearly defined. The fears of a shutdown have been heightened. The probability has surged, and the underlying causes are plainly visible. Nothing here relies on speculation. Nothing here requires interpretation beyond what has already occurred. A civilian death, political fallout, legislative refusal, elevated shutdown risk. That is the moment laid bare. And as the clock continues to move forward, the outcome will be determined not by commentary, but by whether a deal is reached before time expires. Until then, the number remains, the pressure remains, and the deadline holds its ground. Sometimes, someone might say, the silence is the loudest part, and tonight that silence is doing a lot of work.